Great. Thank you. So this is our third sustainability session, all about sustainable transportation. And we have joining us today, Adam Hyslop, the UBC Manager of Transportation Planning. And today he'll be sharing some transportation challenges, goals, and ongoing work within the UBC and UNA context. And I welcome you all to share your burning questions, concerns, commentary, feedback. We'll have some time for discussion at the end. And if you do have something that you'd like to get in particular out of this session today, feel free to put it into the chat. And this is really just a chance to start the conversation and hopefully from here engage with your neighbors, your buildings, and share your own learnings. So with that, I will hand it over to Adam.
Great, thanks so much. And hi, everyone. Happy to be here and appreciate the invitation, Julia, to participate in this. I want to start off by apologizing because I am a bit sick, hopefully just a cold, but I think it's a good thing that we're doing this virtually probably, so we didn't have to cancel. But if I pause to take a drink of water or have a coughing fit, that's why, just so that you're aware. But yeah, as Julia mentioned, I'm Adam Hyslop, the Manager of Transportation Planning in Campus and Community Planning at UBC. And I've been here for a few years now. I started in 2017, and before that, I actually worked at TransLink, the Regional Transportation Authority, for 6 years in various sort of service planning and strategic planning capacities. So I'm coming at this sort of topic of sustainable transportation from that background and with a planner's hat on. So a lot of the stuff I'll be talking about is sort of like the policies, plans, and actions that we're kind of pushing forward within campus and community planning. But I'm also joined today actually by Melissa Tang, who just joined campus and community planning last week. So is just sort of getting her bearings around UBC generally and the sustainable transportation programs that we run. And she'll be taking the reins on a lot of those. So excited to have her come and meet you guys and hear the thoughts from the community as well. So maybe I'll just pull up some slides and I think I'll try to work through this relatively quickly so that we have lots of time for kind of questions and answers. But and definitely if there's anything sort of out of the gate that is really burning for any of you attending that you want to make sure that I cover, feel free to raise your hand, maybe using the feature or speak up at any point. There's relatively few of us here, so feel free to interrupt me as we go through if you have any questions about things that I'm touching on too. And then we'll have time for a more sort of deep dive Q&A at the end. So in terms of what I thought I'd touch on today, and I'll try to keep this again to sort of about a half hour, talk a bit about kind of the big picture transportation challenge that UBC faces or challenges, and how we approach those challenges and some of our existing targets and policies and plans and actions, all the planneries. And then I think a bit about sort of like upcoming or future opportunities that we see as it relates to sustainable transportation and ways that you guys can get involved and help, I think, shape the future of sustainable transportation on campus. And then, like I say, some Q&A. So this is a map of postal code data for all the faculty, staff, and students at UBC. So the student data you have to sort of take with a grain of salt because in some cases students report their parents' home postal code to the university, but it certainly paints a picture of the regional scale of our transportation challenges at UBC, and that we do have people traveling to and from campus to every corner of the region, and really relying pretty heavily on that sort of core transit lines, which is one of the reasons why we're strongly advocating for an extension of SkyTrain to campus, but also other regional investments in the transit network. In terms of sort of on campus every day, we've got about 58,000 students. There's more than that enrolled, but we use sort of the full-time equivalent number to take a guess at sort of the daily population. And then 16,000 faculty and staff, which are mostly on campus daily, although obviously the last couple of years has been a bit of a diversion from that. And then we do have 28,000 people living on campus, about 50-50 within the neighborhood areas of the UNA, and about 12,000 or 13,000 now of those in student residence buildings in our academic lands. So one of the kind of key things when you think about sustainable transportation modes to and from campus is just the sort of reality of where we're located at the top of an escarpment at the end of a peninsula, separated by most of the region and city of Vancouver by a fairly long, sort of wide swath of parkland, which is certainly a lovely amenity for us to have right next to campus, but does mean that journeys are relatively long for folks that are traveling to and from campus and up a big hill. And then the other factor is just the sheer size of campus itself. And so we hear that anecdotally, certainly with students needing to get from one class to another within the 10-minute class changeover period. And we've done some analysis of actual student sort of class schedules and the sort of reasonable distance that you can walk in 10 minutes. And something like 10% of students have schedules that have a problematic kind of distance that they need to walk between classes. So it's a pretty substantial number of people that are experiencing that. And that was part of the drive for from the academic side of things anyways, for implementing a bike share program on campus, which we've also sort of leveraged and expanded to make sure that it also meets some of our neighborhood travel needs for getting around campus. So in terms of plans and policies, we do have a transportation plan for the campus that sort of cobbled together a range of policies and actions that had previously been established through the land use plan, our campus plan, and the previous strategic transportation plan, and put them all in one place, as well as added a few, sort of filled a few gaps that were identified when that plan was put together in 2014. So it's a little bit dated now, and actually a lot of the actions and strategies articulated in that plan either have been implemented or are ongoing things that we're continuing to work on. So we're likely to see a review of this plan as an outcome of the current Campus Vision 2050 process that hopefully you guys are all aware of, and I'll share some information about that, sort of the current stage of that right now later in the presentation. But that plan did articulate these sort of overarching targets for sustainable travel and getting to a sustainable travel mode share of 2/3 of all trips. We're at about, and these are 2019 data because the 2020 and 2021 numbers that we do have obviously been influenced by the pandemic and travel patterns and choices that people are making around remote work and remote learning. So we're using sort of 2019 as the most recent kind of relevant trend and not non-outlier year. But we're approaching that, and we've done really well on the transit front. We're at 54% transit mode share. But as you'll see in a couple more slides, our sort of progress on that front has plateaued to some degree. And then we have targets around both the absolute and proportional amount of single occupancy vehicle trips being taken. And on that front, again, we've been really successful on a proportional basis and in terms of trips per person that are by personal vehicle being reduced. But there has been a slight absolute increase in the number of vehicle trips, and which has been essentially a product of the growth that we've seen on campus, both in terms of institutional growth and neighborhood residents, sort of neighborhood areas being built out. And then we have a target around the sort of total volume of traffic on campus. So just the sort of counts of vehicles rather than the trips themselves, and we have seen a reduction in total traffic, daily traffic on campus since 1997. So this is our sort of the data that we collect on an annual basis using streamline counts of basically bodies moving to and from campus across. We're somewhat fortunate in the limited number of points of entry that the campus has, that we're able to get a pretty good snapshot of how people are traveling to and from campus, and we use that to track our progress against those targets. So you'll see we have made considerable progress, sort of accommodating growth in trips to and from campus almost entirely on transit for the past 2 decades. So keeping those auto trips relatively flat. And it highlights, this map sort of highlights a graph highlights the year that student UPass took effect as a pretty significant step change in the number of trips being made by car versus transit. But also importantly, over this period, we've had steady increases in transit supply. So has really mostly just been sort of frequency increases on the bus network, but also some new express bus routes, as you're probably familiar with, and improvements to our on-campus shuttle route as well. There's also been a 25% decrease in the number of commuter parking stalls available on campus since the late 90s. So we've actually been converting a lot of our surface lots into academic facilities, housing, and green space. And that has sort of constrained the available space that there is for storing commuter vehicles on campus. And with that, steady increases in the price of parking, which also has been a key factor in sort of signaling and driving behavior change. We've also made some headway in the realm of active transportation with a much more walkable and cyclable campus through implementation of our public realm plan. I think that is an area that we see a lot of potential additional investment and improvement in, but there has been a pretty substantial transformation of the public realm, certainly since I was a student at UBC in 2009. This chart shows effectively the same data, but zeroing in on the transit mode share itself, which really shows that the sort of plateauing of progress that I mentioned around moving the needle on transit mode share, which has largely been a result of a constrained transit system that simply can't accommodate more peak hour trips, which is why the university is advocating so strongly for a rapid transit connection to campus. And you'll see we were sort of on a great trend towards our 2040 sustainable mode share target, because transit is and will continue to be sort of the lion's share of those sustainable modes. We're at about 2.5% walking and cycling mode share, and while I think there's opportunity to increase that, even if we were to double the number of people biking to campus, transit is still going to be the sort of #1 sustainable mode. So kind of diving or looking back out at the sort of strategic goals that the university has, and more recent sort of policy direction around sustainable transportation than that 2014 transportation plan. We do have the more recent, just approved in January, I believe, Climate Action Plan 2030, which was the first climate action plan that the university included scope 3 emissions, which are basically those extended emissions beyond our direct operational emissions, things like commuting, travel, food, that do add up considerably. And actually commuting, we know, accounts for nearly the same amount of emissions as all of UBC's buildings and energy use combined. So it's a key sort of pillar of that broadened strategy of the Climate Action Plan, which does articulate some specific actions, some of which are already underway. And I'll touch on a few of these as I go through, rather than kind of walking through this list now, but that is sort of the policy basis for a lot of the work that we're doing as well. So this map just shows the on-campus transit routes and stops and the bus exchange. So we're fortunate to have over 1,000 buses a day flow through the UBC Transit Exchange, supporting about 80,000 transit trips a day. which is at 54% of the total trips to and from campus. And while much of that transit demand is driven by the university itself, and in particular student commuters, our neighborhoods really benefit from the associated service levels and frequencies that would otherwise be hard to justify for neighborhoods of our size and located at where we are at the end of the peninsula. So that sort of two-way demand is increasingly leveling out, and we're seeing that in our annual counts as the neighborhood areas are built up, and residents that live on campus are commuting off campus in growing numbers. We also have the new bus exchange completed in the fall of 2019. The new rapid bus R4 along 41st Avenue that launched in 2020. And at the same time, there were improvements to the on-campus shuttle routes that actually resulted in a 50% increase in service levels on those routes. So they're much more frequent now, or that route, the Route 68, than TransLink was able to operate it before, and without actually needing to add any service hours to the route, which was part of the routing change rationale, basically a better quality of service without added cost. And then the other exciting transit pieces, not shown on this map, but off the map, is construction of the Broadway subway project, which is getting the SkyTrain network a little bit closer to campus. We're 6 kilometers closer, but still 7 kilometers away, unfortunately, with a terminus at Arbutus, and that'll be done open by 2025. I believe they're still on schedule for that, and we're, like I say, working actively with partners regionally and provincially and federally to get commitments to complete the line to UBC by 2030. In terms of cycling, we do have a growing network of cycling facilities on campus, including our first separated cycle tracks enabled through the Westbrook Mall redesign that's been delivered in phases over the past 3 to 4 years. The sort of northern piece of it is just launching, or going to be going into construction, I think, next week. And you might be familiar with the pedestrian priority zone in the center of campus, which has been really key to sort of creating and enabling that pedestrian sort of safe and comfortable area for walking and cycling in the heart of campus. We know there are some conflicts that emerge with the sort of shared design of the space, but between cyclists and pedestrians, but or these perceptions of comfort impacts. But we also know that the sort of alternative to that of adding bike lanes through the pedestrian spaces can be even more problematic, because bikes end up traveling at higher speeds, and pedestrians still might be looking at their phone and walking across a bike path without realizing it. So that design of the pedestrian priority zone is quite intentional. And the other thing I wanted to mention around cycling was we've invested pretty heavily in bike parking infrastructure. We actually now have space for over 9,000 bikes on racks within the academic core, and 850 in the 13 secure bike cages around the sort of perimeter of the academic core, as well as over 200 individual bike lockers kind of scattered around campus. So that's more space for people on bikes than we actually have parking stalls for vehicles, for cars. So we have really made good strides in the past decade on providing that space, as well as end of trip facilities for cyclists. We also introduced new cyclist-oriented wayfinding in 2019, as well as slow zone signage and stencils in that shared public realm to kind of address those conflicts that I was mentioning. And we have ongoing outreach and behavior change programs like Go by Bike Week and Walk and Roll to School programs, and which are all, some of which are delivered through the AMS Bike Kitchen as well. And then we have a bike share program on campus, which I was excited to sort of lead the charge in launching back in I guess the original pilot was in 2018, and then we evolved it in 2019 with the new operator Hopper, and things have been going really well since then. They're actually nearing the end of their 3-year term, but we're looking to extend that, and we've got over 80 hubs now across campus, both academic and neighborhood areas, and see over 35,000 trips a year, and that's even through the pandemic period, which where the student population in particular on campus has been quite low. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that we know that the corridors to and from campus could definitely use some improvements with respect to their cycling infrastructure, and MOTI, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, is actually undertaking a review right now of those corridors. And I'm optimistic that some improvements will come out of that. We don't, it's a bit too early to say what exactly will emerge from that process, but they're looking at it through the lens of their provincial active transportation strategy, which is a sort of a new perspective that for the province to bring to those corridors that they haven't in the past. So we're cautiously optimistic that there'll be some good improvements. And we're also undertaking our own process of developing a campus-wide cycling network plan and identifying candidate corridors and intersections for improvement on campus to make it easier for cyclists of all ages and abilities to navigate campus safely and comfortably. And then the other opportunity with respect to active transportation, I think, is really around e-bikes and their, which we've seen through the pandemic, a really steep uptake of purchasing e-bikes and as a commute mode. And so we're now just sort of scoping different program opportunities to incentivize their use and as a commute mode, and including pursuing funding for an extension of the City of Vancouver's bike share program to campus once they expand their service area westward a bit and introduce e-bikes. We're hoping to be able to sort of piggyback off that and expand it also to campus. And that was also identified within our climate action plan as a early action. And then driving, of course, remains a common mode of travel, and maintaining a network of roads and to access parking facilities and homes and businesses and pick up and drop off areas is important for ensuring that sort of equitable access and meeting the operational needs of the university and for people's daily needs in their neighborhood areas as well. We do have an area, the pedestrian priority zone, that's designated to accommodate service and emergency vehicles only. And I think we're sort of in the early stages through Campus Vision 2050 of thinking about sort of how that zone might evolve or expand in different ways and in different parts of campus, to because we have seen a lot of success about in that area with what it's done in terms of transforming it to be a more people-oriented, pedestrian-friendly environment. We also have a shared ride service within that zone, which is the picture on the lower right, for people with conditions that impact their mobility, whether on a permanent or temporary basis. And that accessibility shuttle is run by the Student Services group of UBC. But we worked with them to sort of identify where it makes sense for pickup and drop off zones and routes through the pedestrian priority zone to maintain that sort of safety and security for pedestrians as well. And then we work with third-party car share providers to encourage their use instead of personally owned vehicles, and especially where rides can be shared, like through our Vanpool program, which is a partnership between UBC, Modo, and TransLink, trying to really drive that sort of shared trip and carpool approach to the use of a shared fleet of vehicles. And then we also use price as a signal, of course, through parking. And starting last year, actually, sort of consistent with those actions of the Climate Action Plan, we've started including a sustainable transportation levy on parking that will help fund a range of programs and infrastructure initiatives over the coming years, focused on transit and active modes in particular. And then we also know there are lots of opportunities to move things further and make it easier for people to make sustainable transportation choices. I talked about e-bikes, and we'll talk a bit about SkyTrain in a few minutes, but there's also trends in automation that may make it more viable to have additional or more frequent shuttle service on campus. And And TransLink is likely going to be expanding the application of their Compass card so that they can be used for more modes and services, sort of reducing the friction between different shared modes and transit, for example, which moves us a bit closer to that this notion of a mobility as a service model. And of course, e-scooters and other forms of electric micromobility are on the rise, and we're staying sort of apprised of that, and we'll be kind of monitoring things as things change in terms of regulations at the provincial level with what that might mean for their use on campus. I mentioned this at the top, but we also know that transportation is by its nature a regional challenge, and people living, working, or studying at UBC are traveling to and from every corner of the region. So the solutions to our challenges are really regional in scope, which is why I'm really excited about the direction that TransLink 30-year strategy called Transport 2050 has taken, which outlines some pretty dramatic expansion of the rapid transit and major bikeway networks. Really encourage you to take a look at that plan for those of you that are obviously interested in sustainable transportation. They're now working on scoping what the first 10 years of delivering on that 30-year strategy might look like. And there's actually going to be an opportunity to engage in that process with TransLink later this month. I think they're launching a public consultation process April 20th around that sort of 10-year priority list of investments. So definitely encourage you to get involved in that process when it launches next week, I guess, or in a couple weeks. SkyTrain, obviously a big one for us, and a strategic priority for the university and our board of governors. This just shows the sort of current project I mentioned around the Broadway subway project on the right, extending the Millennium Line by about 6 kilometers and adding stations, getting it as far out to Arbutus, which is going to be a great sort of improvement for particularly that central Broadway area, but also for UBC commuters that are coming in on and right now transferring to the 99B line at Commercial Broadway and running through that congested stretch of Broadway on very congested buses. So I think it will be a big change in 2025 when it opens, but it is sort of introduced, just sort of shifting the problem a little bit further west. And we're trying to make sure that there's kind of shovels in the ground on the heels of that to keep the project going all the way to UBC by 2030. And the sort of reason for that, or core reason, is really about travel time savings and driving that behavioral change to sustainable modes. So this graph shows kind of current travel times to and from UBC by different modes: the green in cycling, kind of light blue by transit, and then dark blue by driving. And so right now, to all these destinations, driving is the fastest mode, and which is kind of a big factor in people's rationale for making their transportation choices, with actually cycling being the next fastest mode for a lot of these destinations. The transit travel time is often, because it is operating that mixed traffic for the most part, constrained, whereas for a lot of routes, the going by bike, and particularly by e-bike, can be your fastest mode to and from campus right now. But with rapid transit, there's going to be about 20 minutes shaved off of most of those journeys by transit, and will really start to make it a competitive mode of travel to driving, and in some cases much faster, especially when you take into account kind of parking and then walking from your parking to your final destination on campus. So in terms of next steps on the rapid transit file, so there's some upcoming consultation I mentioned on the Mayor's Council 10-year priorities, which we're hopeful that the project will be featured prominently within. And at the same time, or similar time frame, the Mayor's Council is going to be reviewing the outputs of the current phase of technical work that we've been working with TransLink and the City of Vancouver and First Nations and the UEL, and also provincial ministries, on sort of narrowing the scope of the project to what they're calling the regional base scope. So essentially kind of the core structural elements of the project scope in terms of alignment and station locations, with still some variations left, or sort of loose threads left on that might get determined through partner kind of negotiations or ongoing work through the business case stage. But the sort of fundamental elements of the project will get hopefully endorsed by the Mayor's Council also in the kind of late April timeframe. So we're coming up against an exciting period for the project, and we'll hopefully get confirmation again as part of that 10-year priorities list following that April to May engagement. The Mayor's Council will be finalizing that 10-year priorities, sort of an update to what they now have as the 10-year vision, they call it. They're moving away from that terminology, but in June, there'll be a kind of new version of that, which charts the course for then regional investments and really signals to senior governments as well that the region sort of has identified these as the priorities, and so makes those conversations easier about securing the big capital dollars needed for this type of project from senior governments. And yeah, hopefully that will put us on track for getting those commitments in 2024, and then being able to again sort of have a continuous build with the Broadway suburb project when it completes in 2025. And then I would be remiss to not sort of draw your attention to the Campus Vision 2050 process that campus and community planning is leading over the next really two and a half years to develop both a new long-range strategy for the campus 30-year vision, as well as a 10-year campus plan, and likely a output of that will also be, like I said, a renewal of our transportation plan itself. And there is a current phase of engagement on right now that's looking specifically at the draft principles and strategies. There's the link there. Maybe I'll add the link also to the chat just so that you have it, because it's active right now until April 12th. Oh, if I can find the chat. Oh, I don't have it. I'll add it in there later during our Q&A. But there is some draft within those sort of draft principles and strategies is one really focused on sustainable transportation and strengthening connectivity within the campus and to the broader region, and some specific strategies within that kind of broader principle around SkyTrain and sort of integrating it with campus. Prioritizing the use of active and sustainable transportation modes, creating a safe and comfortable public realm, and coordinating with academic planning at UBC sites across the region, sort of speaking to the new Surrey campus that's being kind of scoped and thought about right now. And then coordinating the planning of future UBC neighborhoods and amenities with other regional jurisdictions to make sure that the sort of transportation needs of the neighborhoods are being adequately addressed. So that's the end of my spiel, and really happy to dive into any of those topics. It was sort of a broad brush on a lot of things, so really want to dive in whatever areas you guys are interested in talking about. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That was great. I wonder if you want to stop your screen share and then we could see each other if people want to voice their questions. Does anyone have a question to start or a thought they'd like to share? I was curious how you determine which paths for cycling are the most in demand or the most used. Like, how do you do that research?
Yeah, so we actually, as part of that annual, our annual transportation counts, which we publish in our annual transportation status reports, we do screenline counts, which are basically manual counts of people moving across a line, sort of artificial line. And so we do that at all of the major roads in and out of campus and cycling routes in and out of campus. So it's basically, so we have good data for those kind of to and from campus. In terms of routes that people take on campus, historically, we really haven't had very good data at all around that. And we still don't from a sort of like global, like everyone perspective, but we do have really good data now from our bike share program about how bike share users are, what routes they're taking, because they all of those bikes are GPS enabled and leave sort of breadcrumbs, and that aggregated data is provided to the university by the operator. So we're able to sort of see heat maps of travel patterns and what corridors get used the most. And yeah, that's what's one of the things that's helping to inform our thinking around investments in the network to add some more sort of dedicated cycling facilities, corridors that right now most of our local streets are either just painted bike lanes or sharrows, kind of shared facilities, which on slow moving streets is kind of okay, but doesn't really, it's not comfortable for some people and doesn't feel safe for some people. So we do want to move towards more separated cycling facilities on those roads.
Thank you. We did have a question in the chat from Robert, if there is any recognition in these plans for a limit to growth.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in looking at it from a transportation perspective, we have to think about it from a sort of scenario planning perspective, that there's lots of different potential futures and growth, both of the institution, the university, in terms of student enrollment and faculty and staff, as well as neighborhood growth. There's lots of kind of scenarios that those could go in. And so thinking about how we build a robust and resilient transportation system that can meet the needs sustainably of the campus's travel needs, regardless of kind of where things go in those scenarios, or efficiently meet them in all scenarios. I do think that the question of sort of how much the university grows, both the university itself and in terms of the neighborhood or community element, is a central topic of this Campus Vision 2050 process. So it's a little bit beyond kind of my scope as a transportation planner, other than thinking about what the land use implications are of on the transportation system. But we know even sort of using our existing campus plan, which has growth sort of mapped out to 2040, that the trips generated by that growth that's sort of already in the established plans do justify a SkyTrain extension to campus and do kind of need that if we're going to meet our sustainable transportation targets. And then any growth that's sort of envisioned beyond that, or in areas that weren't envisioned as part of that, our existing plans, would just sort of add to the case for needing that level of investment. But yeah, there's a lot of sort of factors to consider, obviously, in thinking about the growth as a whole for the campus beyond just transportation.
Adam, I'm curious to know if there's anything we've learned from the past 2 years that's influencing how we look ahead for our plans.
Oh, great question. I think there's a really renewed optimism around the potential for remote work and to some degree remote learning. I think if you had asked me 2 years ago what the potential was for the university to be where we're at right now in terms of enabling remote work, and for me to be doing this presentation from home right now, and not from the office or or in person, I would have been pretty skeptical about a sort of significant shift. But now it's, as we've all sort of gotten past those hurdles or mental blocks around the notion of remote work, that I think this effect that's going to have on trip numbers themselves. And we've seen that even when we look at our 2021 total trips, that they have gone down by a pretty substantial amount. The auto part of them, unfortunately, hasn't, or is almost exactly what was in 2019. So the mode shift has been a little bit back towards cars for a number of reasons, like people's level of comfort still with getting on buses and that kind of thing. But and also I think just the like capacity constraint element of the road network and parking facilities on campus is sort of a self-limiting piece that you sort of, it's like a gas grows to fill the space that is available. So I think that's a big opportunity, that actually the like total number of trips being made might be lower than we would have modeled previously, because the sort of reality or feasibility of remote work is much higher. I think on the learning side, I think actually that opportunity is more on the employment and sort of at a regional scale. I think it's going to be a really big thing for student trips and enrollment, the sort of effective enrollment growth on trips. I think there's just so much of the university student experience that is in person and that is fostered by being on campus and having that experience, that I don't see it moving in a huge direction towards remote learning on the long term. We sort of experienced a lot of those pains, I think, through the pandemic and the effect that it had on the overall student experience and just well-being, and that I think there's more sort of trade-offs against that than there are for remote working, particularly in a sort of hybrid kind of few days on, few days off kind of approach to working. And I think e-bikes are the other kind of big trend through the pandemic that I'm optimistic about continuing and being something that we can kind of leverage, because that barrier of the grade change to campus and just distances involved in a lot of people's trips, particularly as affordability sort of is driving people housing further and further from campus, that e-bikes are going to be a big opportunity area for us to put some focus on. I know personally, when I got an e-bike, which was unfortunately just before the pandemic, so I only really used it for a month or so, but it was like a game changer for my willingness to actually bike to campus on a regular basis and not just sort of like once a month, kind of when the weather was just right. I'm still kind of a fair weather cyclist, but it makes it a lot less painful of a notion.
Thank you. I'm happy to ask more questions, but I want to make sure participants get the chance to. So if anyone has, feel free.
I think I have a question generally for the group. Hi, everyone. My name's Melissa Tang. I'm the new Sustainable Transportation Program Lead under Adam. As Adam stated, I'm new to UBC, so I'm keen to learn and have these discussions with our stakeholders. I think generally for my own learning, because everyone has experience at UBC, I was wondering, are there particular resources that you would like to see get developed within the next couple of years in terms of assisting with sustainable transportation? I know Julia and Adam and I have been talking about revamping some of our transportation materials when it comes to maps and marketing, where our bike share programs are including the stations. So that's kind of where we are in preliminary discussion. But generally speaking, I'm keen to learn, are there particular resources or avenues that you would like to see at UBC? Seems like everybody is very shy. I'll put my email in the chat. If anything comes after this discussion, I'm keen to learn more. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me.
I was curious about, I think, Adam, you mentioned that bike parking exceeds car parking in the academic campus. And I was thinking about like the REAP, the green building code. at UBC, and how parking in new builds is limited. Like I think it's even less than 1 car per unit in the high rises that are being developed, the new high rises. So I was curious if there's what bike infrastructure requirements are a part of new builds, or if there's any even like I know retrofitting is kind of always takes the backseat to new builds, but what kind of bike infrastructure comes along with new development?
Yeah, there definitely are minimums with respect to bicycle parking, sort of secure indoor bicycle parking in new residential buildings through REAP, as well as sort of visitor bicycle parking on site but outside. And those have been there, I think, since the beginning of REAP. We've actually sort of, as new iterations of REAP have been implemented, been layering on sort of additional details around the specific sort of design approach for that bicycle parking, and how accessible it is via entrances, and how many doors you've got to go through to get there, and to the point about e-bikes, provision for a power supply within that those bike parking areas. So yeah, I'm not familiar with the specifics. I haven't looked at them in quite a while, other than to say that they're definitely there. There's a section on bicycle parking, as well as sort of additional cycling amenities around bando trip type facilities, storage for lockers and things. Yeah, I can't remember the details off the top of my head, but they're definitely in there, and it's something that we're keen on. And the other kind of opportunity area that we're working on now when it comes to those sort of development requirements is around allocating space for bike share, because we've been pretty successful at kind of shoehorning it in the bike share hubs around campus, but you'll notice some of them are kind of not in the ideal locations, or they're pretty small, or they're using up space that kind of would have otherwise been used for regular bike parking. We've reallocated it, or worked with the local property or stratas to do that. But it was a particular challenge within the neighborhood areas to find space for those. And as we look to also a future with e-bike share, sort of dock-based stations, those are even more kind of space requiring and need a power supply as well. So yeah, we're looking at ways of making sure that new development is going to deliver or set aside the space that then we can put these things in if and when we get funding and it makes sense to do so.
I wonder if I might share a quick story.
Yeah.
I'm on the council of a small condo strata, the north end of UBC. Well over 3 years ago, we started lobbying amongst the owners to install electric vehicle charging. And we had no electric cars in the building at all. And it took some time. We actually convinced the owners, saying it'll increase the value of your unit by having it there. And we just got we had to do most of the construction during the pandemic, which was a challenge, but we now have electric vehicle charging available in every single parking space. And wouldn't you know it, now we have, I think we have about 6 or 7 electric vehicles, and I know there's at least 3 on order. And I think the lesson we learned from this is, it's a chicken and the egg kind of situation. Is if we hadn't done it, nobody would have electric cars. Now that we have the infrastructure, everyone's following the lead.
Yeah, that is so great to hear, because I know that sort of the retrofit aspect of EV charging is probably going to be the most challenging side of things. I think to Julia's point, within REAP now we do have requirements for EV charging, or sort of like the back-end infrastructure to be built in all new buildings for all stalls to be electrified. But yeah, there's a lot of buildings on campus already that have been built with parking without EVs really in mind, and it can be really complicated and challenging for stratas to navigate how to make that happen and fund it and deal with the sort of ownership and responsibility for managing those assets. So kudos to you and your strata for being able to do that, taking that initiative. Because I think you're right, it is a sort of, if you build it, they will come kind of.
Yep, exactly.
Kyle, I was curious if you'd feel comfortable sharing what strata you're in.
We're in Argyle House East. We're right next to the Iona building.
Thank you. Yeah, I put in the chat a link. We did an EV study of some UNA stratas with some case studies, but and I think Argyle was one of the case studies even. So thanks for sharing that.
And I don't mean to say it was easy, and I'm not saying that every building has the capacity to do it, either financially or equipment-wise, but we're glad we got it started when we did.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
In thinking about space requirements as the area is developed, is there a kind of percentage priority with like electric vehicle? If let's say there's public chargers being considered versus electric bike chargers being considered versus car share, like how does that calculation happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's really sort of site by site, which is why we sort of haven't seen any space allocated at the site level to bike share before. Well, because a lot of most of the existing buildings were built before bike share was on campus at all. But I do think there's an opportunity with bike share, like they're not really competing for the same space in a lot of cases. Curbside space and sort of road accessible space is really challenging, and there's a lot of sort of competition on that. But with part of the beauty of bikes is they can be taken off the road and off to the side of the building. There's always sort of a balance to be made with the sort of appropriateness of a site in terms of visibility, and that it is sort of non-site residents that are using that piece of the site potentially. So in some cases, I think it sort of needs to be in the public realm side of things, but it's one of the sort of benefits of the unique kind of development approach at UBC and governance model that we're able to kind of work with Properties Trust to get some things like that might not happen in a more sort of traditional municipal to property owner kind of relationship. So yeah, I'm optimistic that we'll continue to get to be able to navigate those conversations.
Could I just share another story?
Please.
This is Robert. I can't seem to get my video going, but apparently, my mic is working.
Yeah.
This is just about the installing the charging stations. I'm in Stratford, which is in Hampton Place, and we're one of the older buildings on campus, and we have no built-in facilities for electric charging. And we had a vote a couple of years ago when it was voted down to put in chargers, and it's coming up again in a couple of weeks for another vote. In our building, part of the problem is that the existing electrical input is not sufficient to support chargers in every parking space. And so the best that we've been able to do and that we're going to vote on is actually 2 charging stations, level 2, in guest parking, which are networked. So we'll see how that works out. Right now we have 1 electric car in the unit in the building. We're hoping to get more, but that's our story.
That's great. Oh, sorry, Adam. I was just going to mention that if you follow the link in the chat, Robert, there's also a recording of an event that we hosted last fall that had some advisors from Plug-in BC and Metro Vancouver who you've probably already talked to advisors, but they help with like the load questions and capacity questions and incentives, if that's helpful in this decision that's coming up for your strata.
Yeah, thank you. No, we've consulted with advisors, and we've got one working with us now.
Awesome.
So, but thanks for that.
Any other comments or questions?
I was interested in what you were talking about around remote work and UBC as an employer. And I think I was reading that like Microsoft is, and maybe this is also something that's going to come into Melissa's work, but Microsoft was taxing work travel at like 400% or something to, you know, disincentivize carbon emissions for work. And I was curious if UBC as an employer has strategies that are not just about the academic piece, but also as an employment piece to disincentivize emissions and for work.
Yeah. So there's sort of the carrot and stick side of the equation. It sounds like you're talking about a stick kind of approach that Microsoft has taken. And we certainly sort of have that just by virtue of our parking pricing and permit structure. And we, within campus and community planning, we're sort of not directly kind of accountable or responsible for the parking management and price setting of prices. We do have that sort of umbrella policy within our transportation plan that sort of sets the direction towards using price as a behavior change kind of lever and to discourage single occupancy vehicle use. And also a kind of a minimum of that the daily rate should be more than double the single zone transit fare. That was sort of at the policy level kind of where we got. The reality now is that the parking rates are actually much higher than that. I think a single zone fare is $3.05 or something like that, and we charge about 14. It depends on the permit type, but I think there is one for faculty staff that is $9 a day if they buy the like multi-pack, which they just instituted last year as a sort of like taking steps towards, I think I had included, it's in the slide, but I don't know if I actually spoke to it, but one of the climate action actions was to look at our parking pricing structure and move away from these long-term permits that are effectively kind of incentivizing people, like if you're going to drive at all, drive every day because you've already paid for your parking permit. So we want to move away from that. There are some like operational hurdles to that and to providing alternatives. So one approach that we've taken so far in implementing that is introducing these like multi-pack, which is also related to the increasingly remote or sort of hybrid work arrangement where people are coming to campus 1 or 2 days a week and might be driving those 2 days, but don't want to pay for parking for the whole term because they're only coming for a few days. And so it's sort of a middle point approach of having a kind of a punch card type system. So that's one kind of way. The other thing around for specific to employees that we're pursuing is kind of akin to our UPass for students, moving towards some level of kind of discount or subsidy for faculty and staff that do purchase a transit pass, kind of to encourage the purchase of transit passes, which then are an additional incentive that, well, now that I have my transit pass, I might as well take transit every day, not just occasionally. Sort of the flip side of that parking phenomenon. So that's something that we're actively working on right now, and there are some sort of collective agreements or relationships with the labor groups that already have sort of allocated funding towards a sustainable transportation sort of pot of money that to date hasn't really gone towards anything. And so we've been working with one of them at least to put that towards a transit pass, and there hasn't really been a way to do that with TransLink yet, but they have recently implemented, sort of re-implemented what they used to have as the employer pass program under a different kind of name in a bit of a different format with the Compass for Business, I think they call it, program. So we're in talks with them to launch a pilot with that small group, at least to start out and work out some of the kinks with through HR processes and things like that to actually have the money flow that would give a discount for transit passes for faculty and staff. So the carrot side of the equation, I think, is where things are missing right now. The stick side is basically there by virtue of our quite expensive parking for if you're going to drive every day.
Thank you. And yeah, we are at time. I just wanted to also put into the chat, well, first of all, my email. We've started a neighborhood sustainability champions network. So if any of you would like to join, it's kind of just an email list where I'll send updates about upcoming sustainability initiatives or events. And then our next session is on climate friendly food choices. It'll be on May 18th from 11:30 to 12:30. And you can register at that link that I put in the chat. And there'll be a recording of this one too. So you can reach out if you want to rewatch it or have any questions. And I'd like to give a round of applause and thank you to Adam for your expertise and for sharing your knowledge with us. And yeah, I definitely think a lot of us had some great learnings today. So thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And thank you all for joining. Nice to see some faces and connect with you all. Hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you. Thank you. Hope you're feeling better, Adam.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Bye.